Hey everyone, how's it going? They let us get to Friday again, so that means it's time for another episode of the TheLeaf podcast. If this is your first time joining for the podcast, then it's a little different than the other two videos that I post. This one's more conversational. I also sometimes talk about random ideas or thoughts I have for the channel, and usually people let me know either way if it's something they like. It's a better way for me to actually vocalize it than just do polls all the time. So since the video on Wednesday was about Russia, and it was the experiences of a cop in the former Soviet Union era of Russia, I thought that I would kind of continue down the same vein. Not necessarily down the same vein as those stories, but about Russia. So what I've done here is I've translated some stories that I found, and they're pretty interesting. And just before that we get into those, I would just like to let everybody know that since shorts are now able to be 3 minutes, I'm going to upload some shorter stories that I've had in videos over the past year as shorts. As of now, I think I've uploaded 1 or 2 just to see how it goes. And I will leave a pause right here so that if you wanted to skip me talking and go right into what we're going to talk about, then you can do that. So, the first thing that I'd like to talk about isn't necessarily a story. It's more of a cryptid or a creature or spirit from Russia and a lot of Slavic folklore. It's an entity called the Leshy, and this is pretty interesting to me because it seems to have some parallels or correlations with a lot of cryptids that you hear about in Western Europe and North America and Mexico and, even beyond. Every culture seems to have their own version of this creature, and it always looks a little different, almost like it's suited to its area, and it always kind of has some parallels, and we'll get into those now. So in this case, in some instances, the Leshy is revered as a guardian of the forest. It's believed to be a protector of a woodland or a forest or a national forest or something equivalent. Some kind of thing of the natural world. Now, throughout folklore, these things are generally kind of a gray area. Sometimes they're even called a trickster spirit or a trickster entity, because what they'll do, and this will sound familiar, they will lead travelers astray by imitating familiar voices, such as family or friends, way out in the forest and trying to draw you out to it. And no matter how close you try to get to it, it always seems a little farther away, until before you know it, you're completely lost with no hope of finding your way back to the trail or back to where you were. However, though, in other folklore, it talks about a Leshy being more benevolent, still kind of gray, but more on the good side of things, that if you are respectful of nature in the forest and get lost, it'll help you find your way out. In some cases, it's even said that it'll help you on your hunt if you show reverence to the forest and to nature, or leave you gifts of some sort. And there's even cases of farmers that are basically have an agreement with this entity to safeguard their livestock and ensure a bountiful harvest. And now some interesting things about the Leshy besides that is the fact it's also a shapeshifter. It's capable of altering its size and appearance, seemingly at will. It can appear as an extremely tall, towering figure, a shadow being that kind of blends in with the forest and the foliage and all that. But if it wants to, or has some reason to, it can shrink down to the size of a blade of grass. Even in some tales, he shows up as kind of a humanoid kind of creature, but he has green hair and a beard. Lots of times the eyes are said to glow as well. Now, of course, there are some attributes of these entities that are used to more instill reverence and respect for nature and for the forest, and there's probably even some cases of it being used as like a boogeyman type of thing. But I do have a story of one, and here it goes. Well, I'll throw my story in too. Weird stuff sometimes happens to me, especially a lot in my childhood, but that's a long and not so interesting tale. This one, though, I heard firsthand, and I've even talked about it before on the internet lots of times. So I have a dacha, which is a summer house, about 20 kilometers from the city. There's a village nearby as well as some summer house communities, so there's always a mix of people. But in autumn, when everyone leaves, it's hard to find a living soul around. Across from us lived a woman, not a grandma type. She looked quite young for her 50s, but she was a very tough lady. She could drink moonshine, put up fences, weld or lay bricks, a proper builder with the rest of us. She's sharp and sensible, not someone you'd think of as crazy. So one autumn, she went picking mushrooms alone. There's a small river nearby with a forest along its bank. It's maybe 100 meters wide at most. The rest is meadows and clearings, so it's impossible to get lost there. Trust me, I'm a full-on topographic idiot, and even I couldn't get lost there. She entered the forest, picked some mushrooms, and then couldn't find her way out. She wandered in circles for over an hour, but no matter which way she tried to go, she seemingly always ended up in the same spot. She even tried blasting loud music like Sabaton to try and get someone's attention, because like I said, the forest isn't very big. She yelled for help, but obviously no one responded. After a long time, she became exhausted and out of options. She called her friend, another neighbor, that was just a couple houses down from hers. The friend told her to sit on a stump and recite the Our Father prayer 3 times, saying that Aleshi, a forest spirit, was leading her in circles. If that didn't work, he said that he'd have to come help or call the police. So she sat down, she said the prayer 3 times with her eyes closed, and 5 minutes later, suddenly, she found herself in a clearing. Across the clearing, just 200 meters away, was the summer house community. So I have read and I have heard quite a few stories like this over the years, even way before my YouTube channel. Stories like this are actually something that inspired me to become a YouTuber that tells these kind of stories. Also, and before I continue, I just want to say that I love Sabaton, I love their music, but that's just a little personal opinion in there. But I find this one especially peculiar because in a lot of these stories, after they do a certain task, or in this case pray, then they walk around and they find themselves, oh, I know where I am now, like they've been led back on the path. In this case, I could be wrong, but it seems like that she didn't move from where she was praying, that the forest seems to have altered around her. I would also say it's a good thing that she had cell phone service to be able to call a friend too, because, friends can really keep you calm in situations like that. And it's a little funny to me too. Whenever I picture Aleshi, I always think of like Swamp Thing from DC Comics. And usually I would say that I can't imagine being in a situation where you're in a small patch of woods and things just seem to somehow go wrong, or somehow the forest seems to change in front of you or behind you and you try to go back and the path you took kind of is different or isn't there. Usually I would say I've never experienced anything like that, but in this case I have. A long time ago, well, I say a long time ago, but I think it was sometime last year, I showed a satellite image of what the forest generally looks like around the area where I live. I obviously blacked out the coordinates and stuff. But there are lots of trails in that forest that lead to various places, or did at some point, or they're old logging roads that eventually come out somewhere. But in some situations, there's little walking trails that were just kind of only a few feet wide. So when this happened, I think I was 14 or 15, and that would take me into the late 2000s, I think. I think so, yeah. So, when I was walking with my friend, he didn't live around here, he only come up every now and then, so we're walking on the trails, and I'm showing him where they go and stuff. Now, I used to walk these trails by myself, like even in the evening, and never really had anything happen. Which, now that I look back on it, this particular friend wasn't really respectful of nature. He was more of the type to like, oh, I want to light things on fire, or I want to cut all these trees down, or I want to do whatever. I want to make a trail through here, and it's like not anyone's property, so obviously you don't really do that. But that's besides the point, and it's just more of a kind of looking back on it thing. So when we're walking, the whole vibe of the forest seemed to change. Like all of a sudden it changed from like a bright, sunny, warm day to all of a sudden it's clouded over, it's cold. You don't really feel welcome in the woods anymore. That feeling in your gut that says like, oh, we should go home. Generally, whenever I get this feeling out in the woods, I listen, I turn around, and I go home. But in this case, I decided we'll just go to the end of the trail, and then we'll come back, and everything will be fine, and we can go play video games or whatever. But on the way back, something weird happened. This is generally a straight trail with a single turn, and I think it was a left turn that kind of went down a hill a bit. But when we were coming back, the turn wasn't there. It just went straight, and it was seemingly not really uphill or downhill, it just remained flat, which I immediately thought was a little weird because I noticed that like certain landmarks I use, like this big patch of moss or this blueberry bush or whatever, just wasn't there. And obviously it's 100% possible that I just walked onto a different trail that I hadn't known before. Again, I was 14 or 15, so it is possible. But anyways, and then we started walking and walking and walking, and pretty soon we're like 15, 20 minutes longer than we should be, and we don't seem to be any closer to the highway where we would normally turn off to go onto this trail. Now he started getting mad and thinking that I got us lost. He's like, oh, you're supposed to know where we're going and now we're lost out here in the woods. And I'm trying to calm him down, thinking like, these woods are not that big. I'm not that far from home. We just have to find the original trail and we'll be fine. And the part of this story that reminds me of the Russian story that I just told you is that after we were walking for quite a while longer, I had this thought in my head. I don't know if it was like a thought that was implanted or maybe it was like a spirit speaking to me, not saying it was. It was just weird that it came out of nowhere. But the thought was basically to just say that you want to leave. So for some reason, out loud, I said, okay, we want to leave. And if you want to get rid of us, then, just show us the way out. And lo and behold, not even 5 minutes later, we came up on a bend in the trail, and we seemed to somehow be right back onto the main trail again. The big patch of moss that I used to look for was there, the certain markings on the trees were there, and then we very quickly sped walk out of there. Now, I don't know if there was any kind of correlation with the story from Russia, but it just kind of felt similar to me because I got lost in the woods, and it's not a hard place to find your way out of, but for some reason, everything looked off and different. It's also possible that we were just stupid kids and I was talking to nobody, but yeah, it just reminded me of that. So I have another story from Russia, and this one's more of a mining story, and I found this one very interesting, and I think you will too. So it goes like this. Hey there, night crew. A few years ago, I worked a rotational job in Chelyabinsk. There, I met a foreman named Vladimir Sanich. He was about 50 to 60 years old. He came from a family of miners, and since I'm interested in various mystical topics, I asked him if he or anyone in his circle had ever encountered dwarves, forest spirits, or other supernatural beings. He said he hadn't, and he also said that he had never worked a single day in the mines, and he had broken his family's mining tradition. But he did share an interesting legend that he'd heard from his father, which I'll try my best to convey. Among miners, especially older ones, there's a legend that's been passed down since the late 18th century about red skeletal silhouettes. These figures can be rarely seen out of the corner of your eye, on the edge of visibility, deep in the mines in low light. Those who have seen them say the beings either stand completely still or wave their arms as if trying to get your attention. It's generally believed that encountering them predicts either a mine collapse or the nearby presence of coal deposits. People considered these encounters to be a very bad omen and often carried protective charms, like stones with holes in them. They believed that these things come to the surface only once a year, sometimes between late April and early May. Villages living near mining areas claim to have seen them dancing and forming circles on mountaintops during torrential rainstorms and lightning. So stories like that one are extremely interesting to me, because even the person who told the story to the guy who wrote it, he didn't really know what they were. No one really seems to know what they are. But when I heard that at the end, that they can be seen dancing and forming circles on mountaintops during torrential rainstorms, when I read that part, what I thought of was a story that I did from Australia. I think it was last year, it may have been 2 years ago now, where there were these tall entities called the Mayamula, I think they were called, and they did a very similar thing. I've also heard other stories, and I've done them on the channel, of seeing long or tall figures off in the distance in the desert, or out in the wilderness, or out in the tundra even. And no one seems to really know what they are, or who they are, how they got here, why they're here, or really anything. It's very mysterious. I also wonder if there's any way to tell between if they're trying to warn you of a mine collapse, or if they're trying to tell you there's coal over there. I don't know. But I find stories like that to be extremely interesting, especially ones that take place in like deep caverns in the earth, because it feels like it's a whole other ecosystem, a whole other world down there. And we don't even know if they're spirits or some other kind of entity, especially since they're skeletal. Maybe they're like lost miners or mining spirits. I don't know. It's very mysterious. And this next one I also found interesting, and you'll see why. I spent my entire childhood in a communal apartment. Once, I had a dream where I killed an old lady neighbor in the bathroom. I told my mom. We kind of chuckled about it, how kind of weird it was that I'd have a dream like that. A month later, someone was in the bathroom for too long and didn't respond to knocking. My dad had to go over and break down the door, and there was the old lady lying dead on the floor. Later, we moved into a new apartment. We did a decent renovation for the time. We invited relatives over, kind of for a housewarming party. Among them was my 5-year-old cousin. When she had entered the kids' room, she started crying and repeatedly said that she would never have something like this at home. Never, never, never. None of us understood what came over her. It was just weird, unpleasant. The episode stuck with us. When she turned 7, she asked her parents to buy her an angel costume with wings. They couldn't find one, so they bought butterfly wings instead. Then, she had a dream of children that were walking somewhere, but she was stopped and told that she couldn't go any further, that she wasn't baptized. But how could a 7-year-old know about such things? She then unfortunately passed away before her 8th birthday. It turns out that she was right about that house. And then in 8th grade, I got angry at some kid from a parallel class. Together with a goth classmate, we made a wax figurine of him and ceremoniously tore its head off. The next day, we found out that that kid broke his neck that night in an accident. I understand that these could all be extreme coincidences, but they're kind of creepy. Now, with that last one, all I can really say is don't screw around with things that you don't know the consequences of. But also, I'm not a moral authority, so do what you want. Just don't involve me in it, I guess, because I don't want to get sick again. That was rough. But the one in that last story, or collection, I guess, was the more interesting one, was the kind of prophetic dream, or the premonition or whatever. I noticed that, and maybe it's just the people I talk to, but a lot more people are having those now. I don't know if that's just a sign of the times. I don't know if that really means anything, or if everybody's just, I don't know, getting lucky with their dreams. But it seems to be a thing that's happening more and more as time goes on, at least from my point of view. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. And I thank you for listening to this episode of the Leaf Podcast. If you would like to donate to the channel, I have a PayPal and a Patreon in the description below. And if you have an encounter of your own, I have an email down there as well that you can send them to if you'd like to. And with that, I thank you for pulling up a stump, thank you for watching again, and I will see you Sunday. I hope you enjoyed this week's videos. If you did, please like and subscribe. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Have a good week and have a good weekend.